Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Lyric. Some of you might know me as the Neurodivergent Rebel. I am a late diagnosed, multiply neurodivergent adult. So for me, that means I'm diagnosed autistic. I also have an ADHD diagnosis, but that late diagnosed piece is really important to who I am as a human being because I didn't find out I was autistic until I was 29 years old, and the ADHD wasn't discovered until I was in my early 30s, which was quite a shock. Finding out something like that about yourself late in life can be life-changing, to say the least. I'm also a non-binary human, so I use gender-neutral pronouns, they, them, or ze-them. Just don't she, me, and we'll be great. Because accessibility is important to me, I'm going to go ahead and visually describe myself and my surroundings before we get started. I am a pale-skinned, multiracial human in my mid-30s. I have short, dark hair with the ends bleached yellow, green, and orange, and my roots are black and they are showing. I have shaved sides. I'm wearing a red, actually autistic t-shirt that has white font and a rainbow infinity, holding a little rainbow articulated slug stem toy that you may hear or see on occasion, but for most part it'll be below in my lap, and I'm sitting in front of a beige curtain. Quick housekeeping note before we get started. I am going to be very mindful to be slowing myself down as we go into the presentation because I have a natural tendency to speak very quickly, which can be hard for people to process, especially if they have audio processing differences, which ironically I also have. So I am very aware that when people speak quick, it can be hard to understand them. Now that that's out of the way, I wanted to go ahead and jump in to the presentation with you. I want to talk first about neurodiversity, and in case anyone here is new or doesn't know what neurodiversity is, I want to give you a quick definition. So let me read this to you really fast. Neurodiversity is a term that was coined in the late 1990s by Judy Singer. Judy's an autistic sociologist, and what Judy argued was that diverse neurological conditions and learning disabilities, for example, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, hyperlexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and Tourette's syndrome, just to name a few. And what Judy was saying was that all of these different brain types were actually, and also I want to say something before I move in. All of these brain types are more common in autistic people. Like, we usually don't just have one neurotype. We usually have more than one neurotype. So I'm autistic, I'm ADHD, I'm also hyperlexic. There's a lot of stuff going on in this brain of mine. And so all of these neurotypes are more common in autistic people. So that's really interesting to me. Different shades of humanity, I like to say, right? And what Judy said was that all of these brain differences are normal variations in human brain type. Neurodiversity rejects the idea that autism and other neurological processing differences should be cured and challenges the prevailing view that neurological diversity is a bad thing or inherently pathological. Unfortunately, many of the systems that are set up in society have been set up by and for the neuromajority or neurotypical people. Those who are considered to have an air quotes average or air quotes typical brain for the society and time in which they are living. And I don't know if I believe there is such thing as typical the more I talk to humans all over the world, just to be perfectly honest. Before we had a neurodiversity framework to examine divergent, autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent brains, we were blamed for not being able to fit ourselves into these neurotypical systems and these neurotypical programs and structures, our education systems, our workplace systems, all of the systems in place that were set up without our input. And this is often harmful to those in the neurominority, neurodivergent people, those whose brains diverge from what is considered, air quotes, typical from the culture and time that they are living in, because our needs just aren't taken into consideration. Historically, neurodivergent people haven't had much if any, opportunity to give input in developing the systems in society because we're pathologized. We're told that we're broken and our ways of doing things, experiencing the world, thinking are all wrong. And we need to try harder to fit in. We're broken. We don't get to exist the way we are. We have to try to be more, air quotes, neurotypical, which is a really unfair standard to set. Over and over again, we are asked to try harder to fit into these broken and outdated systems instead of flexing or recreating systems so that we can evolve and find solutions that will work better for everyone. Because the current systems and structures that favor the majority often are going to exclude or miss those of us who are outliers. Neurodiversity is so incredibly powerful because it removes the blame from neurodivergent people and forces us to take a look at where society and its systems fall short in supporting brains like mine, like yours, like everyone's, because neurodiversity is the diversity of all brains, neurodivergent and neurotypical. And just like with any other kind of diversity, any kind of biodiversity, animal diversity, diversity of species, diversity of thought, this diversity is good for humanity when supported. And many of the supports, accommodations, and things that neurodivergent brains need are actually things that can benefit everyone in society, including neurotypical, air quotes, typical brains. Everything I do is from a neurodiversity-centered framework. I use neurodiversity as the basis for everything I am teaching and talking about. That is the foundation of which I have built my existence over the past 5.5, almost 6 years. Before I understood neurodiversity, I blamed myself for not being enough. I compared myself to non-autistic and neurotypical people and held myself to their standards. Neurodiversity was what gave me permission to have self-compassion for the first time in my life. Autism is a lifelong difference. And even though I didn't know I was autistic in the 29 years leading up to my diagnosis, I was autistic even before I was diagnosed. And therefore my life and all of the moments in it have been influenced by that autistic experience. And though my presentation and the ways in which I cope and interact with the world may change because they are constantly evolving as I learn new skills and learn new things, I'm always going to be autistic. And my life experiences are filtered through an autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent lens. All of my life experiences, even before I knew I was neurodivergent. A lot of my life was on hold before I found out I was autistic. I needed to know I was autistic because I had been constantly comparing myself to and holding myself to neurotypical standards. And that meant I was constantly burning out and making myself physically and mentally ill. When you are a neurodivergent person living in a world full of neurotypicals, even if you don't have words for what it is that makes you different, I promise you know you're different. I thought I was a neurotypical and I felt myself struggling with things other neurotypical people found easy. And that meant those ways in which I was struggling and didn't feel I measured up became magnified. And I noticed that I was struggling. I noticed on my own I wasn't measuring up. And on top of that, I constantly had people telling me that I needed to try harder, I needed to apply myself, and I wasn't putting in enough effort. Despite the fact that I was trying my hardest, putting in probably a lot more effort than most of the people around me, and still not achieving even the same results. depending on the task. I felt myself struggling to do things other people didn't struggle with, and I didn't know why the air quotes simple tasks were so hard for me. And I put simple in air quotes because simple now I know is relative depending on your brain, but I didn't know that back then. I was struggling, really struggling, barely surviving, not thriving, but I didn't know any better because I had no frame of reference for what thriving could look like. Just surviving, being in survival mode, had been my normal throughout my entire life. I didn't know any better. And it got to the point where all I could see were my weaknesses, and I couldn't even appreciate my strengths until I found out I was autistic and started to heal from that trauma and learn to love myself again. And neurodiversity, as I've said, was that tool. It gave me a new way of looking at myself and my relation to the world and other people in it. I no longer operate from a place of shame. I don't feel or perceive myself like a broken neurotypical person like I once did. I'm simply neurodivergent. And now that I know I'm neurodivergent, I've been learning what I need, how my mind works, and ways to work with my mind instead of against it, as I had been doing for most of my life. Having pride in myself has been an important piece in overcoming all of that shame that had been weighing me down for many years. And that's something I want for every neurodivergent person out there listening to the sound of my voice, for you to realize that no, you're not broken. It's not your fault. Stop comparing yourself to other people, especially other neurotypical people. This world is stacked against us in many ways. It isn't your fault that you're struggling. We're lucky if we're able to be successful when the odds are so hard. But I do think that we can empower ourselves, accept ourselves, learn to love ourselves, and get to that point where we go from surviving to thriving. When I was first diagnosed, I had a lot of work to do in changing the way I thought about myself and my relation to others in the wider world. And learning I'm autistic has allowed me to accept, work with, and compensate for my difficulties, but also highlighted where I get some of my biggest strengths. Being autistic is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's simply how my brain works. And for those of us who are invisible, being fully supported and empowered can often be the difference between success and failure. I'm thriving only now because I'm fully accommodated mentally, physically, intellectually, and sensory-wise. And these are accommodations I didn't even know I needed for almost the first 30 years of my life. But trust me, I really did need them. Because before I had them, I was constantly physically and mentally ill. And since learning about my neurodivergence over 5 years ago now, it'll be 6 years this fall, I've learned something I wish I could have known all along. And that is that I can only be truly happy and successful if I'm able to be my most authentic self, permitted to exist and be comfortable in my own skin, as I'm sure is actually the case for any human listening to the sound of my voice or reading the captions on this video today. I'd love to ask for you to think about this question on your own right now. I like to ask this question when I am in a room full of people because we can all raise our hands and it's very impactful. But to yourself, I want you to think, do you struggle to be happy if people need you to pretend to be someone or something you're not? Does that make you unhappy? Does that make you miserable, that expectation to be a false version of yourself? If I ask this question in a room full of people and I say, raise your hand if that makes you unhappy, I promise you all the hands will go up. Because it's a very basic human need, needing to be accepted as we are. The whole person. Strengths, weaknesses, identities, autistic, ADHD, neurodivergent, queer, trans, multiracial, disabled, all of those identities. Throughout my life, hiding parts of who I am prevented me from moving forward, getting help when I needed it, and developing authentic relationships. In my 30s, I started the journey of unpacking and undoing all of that damage, because I'd learned to mask all of those weaknesses instead of speaking up for my needs. I didn't feel as if I deserved to have my needs met. I constantly put my needs behind the needs of other people, making someone feel as if their needs are an inconvenience, they are a burden, or if parts of them are unlovable and undesirable is one of the cruelest things that you could possibly do to a person. It really eats away at them. But we do this constantly to autistic and neurodivergent people. And so many of us don't ask for what we need, don't ask for what we want, and we aren't getting our needs met. And the good news is, once we start asking, once we start getting our needs met, we can do a lot better. We just have to find the courage to ask for help or demand the resources. But it's hard to get to that point. For the first time in my life now, I have felt like I have the right to ask for what I need, to ask for help. And I've got my needs met. Needs I didn't know I had for most of my life. If you were to start taking away these supports, like with any other disability, you would quickly see me fall apart. Because having my supports met is the difference between my success and failure. If I'm expected to concentrate, for example, I can't work in a noisy, busy open office with phones ringing and people chatting and a lot of chaos and background noise going on. I'm going to be frustrated, annoyed, agitated. I'm going to feel upset that my quality of work is poor and my focus will be all over the place. My work product's not going to be good. Nobody wins. It just makes everybody miserable. If I want to stay healthy, I have to avoid certain types of lighting and glares because those things can give me migraines and seizures, and those are serious health issues. All of these small, customized supports based on my individual needs as a human being. What supports work for me may not be the supports that work for the next autistic or neurodivergent person. Our human needs are often very different, even if we share similar or the same diagnoses or neurotypes. If you take any person who has a disability, whether it is an invisible disability or a visible disability, and you take their supports away, you're going to see them struggle. If you take away my supports, as I've said, I'll likely become pretty sick. And within months, I will be unable to function in society. My supports, adjustments, whatever we call them, allow me to perform at the same level as everyone else, so that I may operate within the systems that weren't set up with my needs in mind. They help level the playing field in this neurotypical game, because it isn't the neurodivergent's fault. It isn't my fault that I'm struggling. It's a darn miracle that I've gotten this far. And as we continue to work on these problems, spread understanding and acceptance of neurodivergent brains all over the globe together, like we are doing today with this event, things will continue to get better. Things have already gotten a lot better in the 5.5, almost 6 years since I was diagnosed. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the next 5 years. Thank you all so much for coming today, giving us the gift of your time, giving me the gift of your time, listening to my voice as I ramble on for about 20 minutes. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I will see you around. Bye all.